Welcome to this referendum meeting. I think you would have to describe the cast that's lined up to speak to you here as a stellar line of talent. People who have an enormous experience in Scottish politics and Scottish life. Now, politicians have a tendency to talk too much, and we want to listen to your questions tonight, so I have tried to warn my colleagues that shortish speeches would be welcome, and then there's going to be plenty of opportunity to ask questions. The bar will not be open during that period, so no doubt the questions will be very restrained and orderly. The bar does not open until the Cowal starts, but we're aiming to finish this part of the proceedings just after 9 o'clock, and then the Cowal will get underway just before 9:30. Now, the first speaker, who's drawn the short straw to speak, is my old and close friend. He's older than he looks, Angus MacNeil. He and I have worked together for, I think, the best part of 20 years. He's no stranger to Argyll. He taught in Mull, in Salin, in the Gaelic unit. Now I'm afraid he has been sent abroad to argue for his country, member of the Westminster Parliament for the Western Isles. But I'm afraid if this referendum is successful, he is delighted to be being put out of a job. And he'll be back here to work very hard in Scottish politics indeed. He is a Barra man, and he will be introducing at the Cowal the Battersea Boys later on. But if he does this without music, I'm sure he will still be very persuasive. Angus Brennan.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all for being here tonight. I had hours of prose ready, I had jokes and witty asides, a speech to rival John F. Kennedy's, and I got in here and Mike told me, "You've got 5 minutes, MacNeil, keep it short and snappy." Thank you, Mike. Glad I've known you for 20 years. One other thing I've got to say is that, while I'm here from Barra, and the Hebrides, the Battersea Boys as well, I was told by Mike, for goodness sake, don't forget to say your wife and her dancers are dancing here tonight, between the speakers and the Battersea Boys. So I've done that, and the divorce lawyers, if there are any in the house, should stay well away from me. I think it's fitting that I should speak first. Westminster is the warm-up act here for what hopefully is going to transpire in the next 3 weeks. We'll be moving on to the legends of independence, such as Jim Sillars here on my right, and I would be very, very pleased indeed to lose my job at Westminster under those circumstances. I've made an audit in the Outer Hebrides. 26,000 people win with independence, one person loses. That one person has to say to the 26,000 winners, how selfish can you be? Can you not think of the loser? I will describe him. His name's Angus. He goes to Westminster on a weekly basis. He's going to lose his job, while the rest of you will get better off. I find when I'm in Westminster that people like the Icelandic ambassador will tell me he's amazed that we're having this debate in many ways in Scotland. It should be self-evident that we're independent. He said if the Icelandic people were voting for Scotland in the blink of an eye, you'd have 75% plus of the Icelandic population. That is a country 1/17 the size of Scotland, about the size of Dundee, and they are strutting the world stage. From Slovenia to Reykjavik, I find the same. When I speak to international journalists, when the interview's over, the usual line is, I didn't say this, but good luck for Scotland. We've done the hard thing. We've moved the powers. We've started the Parliament. We have a government. We're only moving the rest of the powers. This independence referendum is only completing the powers of the Scottish Parliament, moving them from Westminster to Holyrood. The sweep of history is with us. 100 years ago, we had 50 independent nations across the globe. We've now got 50 independent nations in Europe alone. And the world has come closer together. What keeps us close together isn't governments or sharing prime ministers. It's just the natural things of the world, the things we've got in our pockets, mobile phones, the internet. Governments can't claim any credit for that, although they try to do so. And I was just mentioning to Jim earlier, actually, if we vote yes in 10 years' time, we wouldn't be able to find a person who will admit to have voted no. And Jim said that if we vote yes by Christmas, you won't find a person who will admit to voting no, because such will be the self-evident success as the step is taken and the confidence has grown. And indeed, it was said by David Cameron, Scotland could be another such successful independent country. He was referencing Finland, Switzerland and Norway when he said this. Finland 10% richer, Switzerland 50% richer, and Norway 85% richer than the UK, a country that at my birth was 9% poorer than the UK, but shows when you've got the good fortune and when you make the right choices in your own interests, you can leap and change the very course of your own history. Norway, to just go over important ground, I feel, now has a $750 billion oil fund. If Norway's oil stops tomorrow, and the UK's oil stops tomorrow, the UK gets £0, 0 pence for last week's oil, last month's oil, last year's oil, last decade's oil. Norway, after oil is finished, if it was to finish tomorrow, would get £16 billion per year, every year, in the future, on the past oil. When oil is projected to be finished in Norway, that $3.3 trillion oil fund will be worth $68 billion. And I think if we're not aware of the changes we could be making in Scotland, that alone should make people wake up to the misgovernance we've had over many, many years. I want to emphasise that the referendum changes only one thing. It changes where power is located. It doesn't change anything about the Queen, it doesn't change anything about NATO, it's not about the European Union, it's not even about the pound. Alistair Darling admitted so in what I call the mauling in the museum, an event to rival the Thriller in Manila or the Rumble in the Jungle. I think the knockout was more convincing in the mauling in the museum. It certainly put a spring in my step, and I know in everybody else's step. The No campaign, even at the end of that, it was interesting to see Alistair Darling say he still had no answers. This was the man who provided the answer himself. I would like to see Alistair Darling speaking to Galileo. He would ask Galileo, if the Earth doesn't go around the sun, what is your plan B? And he could be told yet time and time again. But I can tell you, I can let you into a secret, I know what Westminster's plan B is when we say yes. It's going to be Alex Salmond's plan A. It's going to be a currency union because it's in their interest to have a currency union. And some are telling me they're not voting yes because of Alex Salmond. I challenge them, will you insist on paying tuition fees, or your family to pay tuition fees at university of £9,000 a year just because Alex Salmond abolished them? This referendum is simply not about Alex Salmond. It's not about me. It's not about many people. It's about us all collectively, not individually. I was asked recently by an Irish journalist if this was about the heart or the head, and it made me think. And I said, it's actually both. The head tells me this is the fourth most unequal country in the developed world, but the heart feels very sorry for the 100,000 kids that are moving into poverty. My head tells me this is a rich country, paying 9.5% of the UK taxation in the last year, with 9.3% of the spending, with $1.3 trillion of oil reserves. But my heart says this is a waste. There's a waste when we are spending money on nuclear weapons just over the water from here. And my head says Scotland should, must and could and will hopefully vote yes. But my heart tells me that the pride will only well in it when that actually happens. Scotland can do it. And as many have said, Scotland should and will do it. And recently, as the Icelandic ambassador told me, when we voted for independence, prosperity followed. The demand for guarantees is almost nonsensical. And finally, if I can, and I'm looking over at Mr. Russell there before I get a clip around the ear, the important thing that we have to look at, I think, finally here, is that if we vote no, we've given carte blanche to Westminster. In 1979, we did the equivalent, and we got not just a Tory government that ran ruin across Scotland. We got a Labour opposition that preferred that Tory government to independence. We must never let such a government or such an opposition be over us again. This is our time, as has been said. This is our time, and we have to take it.
Angus, Brendan, thank you very much for that. Effective as ever. I now want to ask Carolyn Leckie to say a word or two. 4 weeks ago this very night, Carolyn and I were debating in Craigmuir on the island of Mull against Douglas Alexander and Mary Galbraith. And I have to say, it was the first time I'd been on a platform with Carolyn. My period of being out of the Parliament was her period of being in the Parliament. But I wish I had been in the Parliament with her. We might have disagreed on a whole range of things, but in terms of making an effective argument for change in Scotland, I thought that Carolyn's contribution in Mull was quite exceptional. Douglas Alexander, as you know, can be very smooth. He wasn't smooth by the end of that Thursday night. He had certainly had a mauling, and he'd had it from somebody of principle and vision and passion. and it's delightful to see Carolyn here tonight. Please.
Technology, it always happens. Thank you for having me tonight. I've had a wee bit of a stressful day, so I'm really glad to have arrived safely and just about on time, and you had me already started before I got here. I'm representing Women for Independence, and I'll have a wee cheeky joke here. You might not realise it, but women are 52% of the population. Unfortunately, we're not 52% of the platform this evening. And Women for Independence was set up for a number of reasons, but one of them was we are 52% of the population. We will be seen, we will be heard, we will be making a lot of noise, and we will be campaigning for independence, and we will not be going away after independence either to make sure women have the 52% representation that we deserve. So, I don't know how many undecided people are in the room tonight. Judging by the applause, I think a lot of people are already voting yes, which is great. But I am going to aim some of my points here at anybody who's still got questions, and I would encourage people who have got questions, who maybe vote no, who are undecided, to make sure they get their questions heard here tonight and not be overwhelmed by what is amazing to me, remarkable support for yes. But this is your place. One of the things that has come up in the course of the last 2 years, and myself and other people have been on platforms hundreds of times now probably, is this fear of the risk that's perceived as being represented by independence. And the Yes campaign, quite rightly, has presented a positive vision for an independent Scotland. All the possibilities, all the things we could do with the power, with all of the power to do all of the things that meet the aspirations and values of the Scottish people, however they vote in a majority in whatever electoral system we have. It is about that. But there are fears, and risk is something that is mentioned. But I'm not going to make any apology, because I sometimes think that when we talk about risk, it's only independence that gets examined. It's only Scotland that gets examined. Nobody can guarantee what policies there will be 6 months after independence, 1 year after independence, 5 years after independence, because that is up to us. And for the first time in history, all of the big powers, all of the big decisions will be in our hands. And for the first time, we will get, as a country, the government we vote for. So if you've got questions about what the policies will be in a future independent Scotland, you've got the answers, because we will decide. Unlike for more than half of my lifetime, when there's been a government in London that the majority of people in Scotland did not vote for. And when you weigh up risks, you've got to balance it in both hands. And you've got to look at what the risks posed by Westminster are. You know what it's like to live under Westminster rule. You know what it's like to go to war when people are marching in the streets resisting it. You know what it's like to get a Tory Lib Dem coalition that we didn't vote for, who have implemented massive public cuts whilst continuing to allow bonuses to be paid to bankers that put us in this mess in the first place. When there were alternatives, like Iceland, for example, who jailed their bankers. There is other choices. There are other choices. And so, when you look to the future, when you've got a welfare cap that Labour as well have agreed with and committed to, no matter the outcome of next year's Westminster general election? What choices are there of radical change, of having control, of having your values and principles implemented by those elites? If you don't like people like Alex Salmond or Mike or anybody in this platform or anybody likely to be elected to the Scottish Parliament, that's okay. But if you make your decision on independence based on the people in the Scottish Parliament you don't like, then you really have to examine some of the people, some of the shire at Westminster. Are you going to vote no in favour of the UK because you like David Cameron? Or because you like Ed Miliband? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Or a very realistic prospect with the UKIP winning the last European elections in England with 30% of the vote, and Nigel Farage declaring his candidature for Westminster, and Boris Johnson throwing his hat into the ring and starting his bid for Tory party leadership, with the trajectory of how people in England are voting. It's a bit of a fright there. This is just to illustrate the point of how scary this is. You have the very realistic, I've been saying this for 2 years now, and people used to laugh as if it was like a fantasy. It's a very realistic prospect of a UKIP Tory coalition with Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister and Nigel Farage as the Deputy. Now, if that's no risky, I don't know what is. And you've got Westminster proposing to take us out of the European Union, offering a referendum, because they're quite happy with the neoliberal, right-wing, big business-friendly aspects of Europe. But they want to get out of Europe away from free movement of people. They want to get out of Europe away from rights for protection of workers like the working time regulations. They want to come out of the European Convention on Human Rights. Everything that is progressive that has been achieved by the institutions of Europe, that's what they want rid of. And that's what you're risking by voting no. And again, it's a very realistic prospect. Now, people, I think, probably are reluctant to take a polarised position sometimes, and obviously this referendum is aye or no. So we'll have to jump one way or the other. There could have been other questions in the ballot paper, but Westminster refused to put them there. Under the pressure of the referendum, the parties at Westminster have started to concede 2 weeks, a couple of months, and they've picked off a couple of powers that you might have. How did they decide what ones wouldn't make the sky flying? How did they pick them? And so they're contradicting themselves, left, right and centre. And it's under pressure of this movement. 2 weeks, a couple of months, and they've picked off a couple of powers that you might have. How did they decide what ones wouldn't make the sky flying? How did they pick them? And so they're contradicting themselves, left, right and centre. And it's under pressure of this movement. It's under pressure of yes. And if they make concessions under that pressure, just think what we could actually do, not just with the threat of independence, but with actual independence. And you need to know when victory is in sight, and you need to know when to grasp it and push yourselves over the line that wee bit more, and don't just settle for what they're prepared to give you off the table. A few sweeties. I don't want just a few sweeties. I don't even want the jar of sweeties. I don't even want the shop. I want the whole damn factory. And what we could do with all of the powers, even despite maybe being a bit unsure about the transitional period, which, by the way, would be a lot clearer in terms of how assets and liabilities and all these things would be divvied up. It would be a lot clearer if the Westminster government wasn't point blank refusing to pre-negotiate before a referendum. They refused to contemplate the prospect of independence. So more detail about the transition would be available if Westminster cooperated, but they won't. But we get by that period, and it's not just about the next year or 2 or 3 or 4. It actually makes me shiver to contemplate the prospect of a yes vote. I was driving the day, and you're driving and you're thinking, and it did actually make my hair stand up on end, because it was the first time I had dared to contemplate that on the night of the referendum I would start seeing those ballot papers mounting up, and they would be piling up for yes, and I could see it and I could visualise it, and I was just like, oh, that feels good. And I think we have to keep the vision of the future in our heads and aim for it, even if there's a wee bit of insecurity and unsureness in the first couple of years. Because I trust all of us to make it worth it. And there are examples, for women particularly, of the 10 top countries in the world for women. Quality of life, equality of pay. They're not totally equal. No country in the world is totally equal for women. But the most equal country for women is Iceland, which is a population, I think, as Angus referred to, less than Edinburgh. It just shows you what you can do with political will, despite their financial difficulties in Iceland. They took a very different approach, and despite that, they are still, year after year since it started being measured, #1 in the world for women. Whereas the UK, in that same measurement chart, has been slipping year after year after year after year since it started being measured. So there's 2 paths here for women particularly. We can aspire to being as equal as Iceland and Norway and Finland and Denmark, because all of them are in the top 10 for women. The states that the UK Westminster government aspire to, like the United States of America, are way down the bottom of the pile. So there are 2 paths. It is polarised. All the best people, most progressive people are on the side of yes. The optimistic people are on the side of yes. The naysayers and doomsayers and pessimists and big business and vested interests are on the side of no. And so you will have to make your mind up and plump for one or the other. And I would urge you to be on the yes side and join our movement and take control of our future for the first time ever in Scotland's history. And we will write it. We will make it. The genie's out the bottle. We'll not leave it up to the politicians. We will do it. We'll deliver. It'll be our responsibility. We will have the power. And let's go and go over the line.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, and thank you for, despite having had a bad day, giving us such a powerful message to get over the line. Our next speaker is not one of those machine politicians that are being talked about. He has a machine, though. He's got the most wonderful machine outside. You'll see the spirit of independence, that big blue machine. And you, Chris, and I'm going to introduce you this way, you're somebody who's been a self-starter in this. You've seen that Scotland's changing, and you wanted to encourage that change, and you haven't come from a conventional political background. There is a genuine grassroots movement, the like of which none of us has ever seen, that's driving forward to independence. And we want to hear about that from you. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. You'll have to excuse me, I'm not very comfortable being lectured. Pace up and down here, it's also because there's so many people in here tonight I need to speak to. So, my name's Chris Law, I'm here from Dundee, and I've been travelling for the last 2.5 weeks with a small crew. With a small crew in a very big truck. And you might ask, well, what's the big truck about? So I've been involved in this campaign as, first of all, somebody probably like yourself, who's on a journey trying to find out more information, and as you find out more information, develop your debate, your argument, discussions with friends and family. And from there you go forward and you start to talk to others out with your family, to your neighbours, to your colleagues. You might have joined the yes group, or you might have joined the no group. I don't know where you're at the moment, or you might still be a don't know. For me, I'm a business person from Dundee. I've been in a range of businesses, but currently financial services. But I've also run motorcycle expeditions up the Himalayas and been a documentary filmmaker, so I've had a varied life. I came to this situation we're in now, which I'm just about to tell you about, it's about independence, really through wanting to engage for probably the first time in my life in Scottish politics. Now, I studied politics when I was younger, but it always felt a bit removed from me. It was about other people governing society. It was about other decisions being made elsewhere. So although I took a great interest, I found myself still feeling a little bit like an outsider. What's happened for me in the last 3 years is I've become an insider, and that's quite exciting. In fact, I'm part of one of the biggest families that I've ever been in. And over that time, I've looked at all the different organisations, and there are many, been involved in the campaign on the yes side. I think we know who's involved in the no side. And by no ways is it black and white. The Spirit of Independence is a national campaign that I set up personally earlier this year, really out of compulsion more than anything else. I set it up because what I saw across the whole range of organisations was one thing in common for Scotland for the future, if you vote yes. The measure of a good society is a society that of course allows for entrepreneurship, for opportunity and for prosperity. That's important, but that has to be for all of us. So the measure of a good society is one that looks after its sick, its most vulnerable and its poor. And what I've seen in the last 3 years during this debate is a war on the poor, an attack on the disabled, and standard of living going down as each passing month goes by. So I found myself in a situation by January this year that I'd not only in the last 2 years joined the political party, the SNP, I have to say, I'm very proud to be a member of, but I've also been a member of Labour in the past. But I also went and joined Business for Scotland. Business for Scotland got 2,500 members that are within it. And they're all people from large to medium to small organisations who are running their own businesses and see the potential for Scottish society and for Scotland as a whole. I also been out canvassing with Radical Independents, who, if any of you have been here out with them already, they don't necessarily share the same views as the SNP. So I found myself a little bit both outside and inside because I wanted to see where the different organisations were. So here was the plan. The Spirit of Independence was to carry the whole damn lot. And I found we've got 19 different organisations of campaign material within our fire engine. Now you might wonder why we've got a fire engine. Truth is, I bought it drunk one night about 2 years ago. However, the thing about this particular vehicle is I wanted a vehicle that was to inspire. That you can imagine something that's above and beyond just a head debate. Something that made you feel emotionally good. This should be a good time for all of us. All of us sitting here, can you imagine being in a hall of nearly 500-600 people talking politics 3 years ago? Virtually impossible. And I've been invited, not as a politician, but I have to tell you guys, I've been invited as a special guest. Get that. So, we've been on the road. This is a grassroots campaign. It's a national campaign. It's for 40 days and 40 nights. And believe me, it was biblical the first day because it rained all day and all night as we travelled. We've been interviewing grassroots supporters. We've been interviewing people like Brian Cox, who is a Labour Party member, Dennis Canavan. We interview members of SNP, Carolyn, Leckie, believe it or not. I'm going to hopefully interview you soon. I don't know that, Jim, I've already asked you, so you're also in trouble. And we're making short films as we travel. We're carrying in the heart of the fire engine, like I say, 17 or 18 different organisations of material. So it's not all about the white paper or the SNP vision. There's Labour for Independence, there's Women for Independence, there's In Place of Fear too, is that right, Jim? There is English Scots for Yes, I've got Africans for Yes, I've got Scottish Asians for Independence, I've got, oh, here we go. I've got so much material, I haven't managed to read all of it yet, but believe me, I know an awful lot more than I did a few years ago. And we're travelling around Scotland just now on a 3,000-mile quest. And what I have learned is this. In the last I will. I'm about to start singing in a minute if this continues. In the last 2.5 weeks, we've been... Is it better here? Hello, and now the time is near. Okay. Well, Mark, sorry. Just catching that. Oh, I see. So you can tell I don't generally talk about top slides. So we've been from Skye right across the northeast, right down through Aberdeenshire, Angus, Tayside. We've been over at Faslane interviewing about the changes going on there and the excitement there for getting rid of nuclear weapons. We've been down to Dumfries and here we are in Dunoon. The fire engine itself is not just about getting drunk and having a bit of fun. Actually, it's got a very serious message. It was built in a time of fear. It was actually built to protect you, believe this or not, to protect you in the event of a nuclear strike. Now, I know how fast that drives, and it's not going to get anywhere fast. It does a top speed about 45 miles an hour, and believe me, it's hot and noisy as well. It was built actually to carry water and to pump it to an area being affected by a nuclear bomb. So it was a perfect thing for transformation into a project for hope. I'll round up by saying this. What I have learned from all of these organisations and why I'm so compelled to be here tonight, I've closed my business. All the money for this, what we're doing is raised from literally all of us here, grassroots supporters. It didn't come from big business, it didn't come from a multi-millionaire with a big cheque coming in, it came from ordinary people. I consider myself an ordinary person. I'm on the road for the next 2.5, 3 weeks, and during that time we'll continue to speak to the different yes groups. But I'd say vote aye. Vote aye for imagination. Vote aye for your own integrity. Vote aye for the ideals and ideas that are coming out of this campaign. Nationalism, we hear a lot about, but let me tell you this, I'm a new nationalist. I'm a nationalist based on the fact that we're building a society based on values. Values about what a good society is. So when you go home tonight, think about what you've got for the next 3 weeks if you don't know. If you're a yes voter and you haven't canvassed yet, get out there, find out who your local groups are. I've seen so much commitment through the various groups on the ground, and so much support makes me feel like a big family. And we can show the rest of the UK how to be a big family too by the things that we do in an independent Scotland. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's absolutely great. Now, this is going to be slightly embarrassing for somebody in this hall. I've been handed a bit of paper about a car that's parked in the wrong place outside. So if it's you can creep out. It's a Passat SG05VUE. One of the people who signed Alec up into the SNP many, many years ago. I worked with him. One of the people who signed Alec up into the SNP many, many years ago. I worked with him in his first by-election, which was Glasgow Central, and Jim, of course, was instrumental in campaigning there as well. And in all those years, we've worked for the same thing, which is to secure independence for Scotland. And now, 3 weeks exactly to that referendum, it is an enormous privilege to welcome Alec to the constituency of Argyll and Bute, which I represent, to welcome a valued colleague, somebody who is a man of great political principle and a man who's helping Scotland develop its world-beating health service. And I'm also pleased to call him a friend. Alec, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. Can I say last night I was speaking in the Pearce Institute in Govan, and I pointed out to the people there that the last time I spoke in the Pearce Institute in Govan was on the eve of the Govan by-election in 1988 when Jim was the SNP candidate. And I always remember that day, the polls and the pundits were predicting that Jim had no chance of winning the Govan by-election the next day. Can I tell you, the polls and the pundits were totally wrong that day, and I believe they're totally wrong about their forecast for the 18th of September as well. And one of the reasons why the polls and the pundits haven't got it is because serious subjects like the future of the National Health Service are the very subjects in which people's decisions, particularly those who have still to finally make up their mind, these are the topics that are going to be of major top concern to people. And I just want to spell out and concentrate tonight on the whole issue of the National Health Service and why a no vote is a real threat to the future of the National Health Service, and in particular, a threat to the founding principles of the National Health Service as stated by Nye Bevan when he set it up in 1948. And those fundamental principles are, first, that the National Health Service should be free at the point of use. Secondly, decisions on health care should be made on the principle of clinical need, not the ability to pay. And thirdly, the National Health Service is a public service, publicly owned and publicly controlled, not for the private sector to dominate and domineer. Now let me tell you why these principles are under real threat. And there are four major threats to the health service, all in relation to the funding of the health service in future. But before I spell those out, let me tell you what the three biggest challenges are for the future of the health service in Scotland. The first one is what I call the equality challenge. If you go to parts of Glasgow, the average lifespan for a man is 57 years of age. If you go to another part of Glasgow, the average lifespan for a man is 78 years of age. A 21-year difference between the poor end of the subway and the rich end of the subway. So a key objective of our health policy is to close the gap between the man at the end and the woman at the end of one end of the subway and those at the other end of the subway. It is a national shame for us that there is a 20-year gap between those living in poverty and those on average and above income. And the reason that gap exists is because of the concentration of poverty and deprivation in one end of Glasgow compared to the prosperity at the other end of Glasgow. And as your health secretary, my objective is to close that gap. The health service alone can't close it. Education, housing, benefits, employment, these are all essential parts of the jigsaw, but absolutely central to that is the National Health Service. The second big challenge we face in the years ahead is the ageing of our population. Over the next 20 years or so, there will be nearly a doubling of the number of people aged 75 and over. Now, with the ageing of the population come a set of other challenges. And it's a good thing that the population is now living much longer. But we need to make sure they live not just longer, but that those extra years are healthy years for our ageing population. So we face many more people with chronic conditions. We have many more people with long-term conditions. 40% of the adult population in Scotland has a long-term condition. And because of the progress of medical science and technology, diseases that 20 or 30 years ago were a death sentence are now long-term conditions. If you had prostate cancer 30 years ago, there was probably something like 2 to 3 years between diagnosis and death. Now, if you get prostate cancer diagnosed early enough, you will live for another 20, 30, 40, or even 50 years. And when you eventually die, you will die with prostate cancer, but you won't die of prostate cancer. But that means the National Health Service isn't just looking after you for 2 or 3 years between diagnosis and death. It means we're looking after you over 30, 40 or 50 years. And that has major resource implications for the future of the National Health Service. So we have got to ensure that our ageing population can live longer and healthier. And to give you an indication of the demands on today's health service, let me give you 2 statistics that I think will be a surprise to you. The first one is that every day of every week in Scotland, half the population, half of the entire population of Scotland are under the care of the National Health Service. It might be for a repeat prescription, or it could be for a terminal illness. But every day of every week, half of the population are involved directly with the National Health Service. And another useful statistic, over 50% of over 65-year-olds get 5 or more pills a day through the National Health Service. So the National Health Service is absolutely essential, not just to the health of the nation, but to the economy of the nation, to improving educational outcomes, to making sure that our people get the best and realise their full potential. And the third major challenge is the financial challenge. Over the last 5 years, we have ring-fenced the health budget, the so-called Barnett consequentials that have been laid aside in London for health. Our share of those, when they came to Scotland, have been ring-fenced. Now let me tell you that that has not been easy, because during that time, our capital budget has been slashed by 26%, and our operating budget has been slashed by 8%. So if you ring-fence the health budget, it has serious implications for every other public service budget in Scotland. So therefore we took the decision to ring-fence the budget. But even with a ring-fenced budget, there are huge financial challenges, and there are 3 major challenges. The first one is that inflation in the health service is a lot higher than normal inflation. New medicines, new treatments, and the fact that treatment now is interdisciplinary, requiring a team of doctors, not just one, makes healthcare much more expensive today than what it used to be. And secondly, the cost of buying in new equipment is much more expensive as well. And the third one is our population is rising. And that's also welcome news, but obviously if your budget is ring-fenced and static, that is a real challenge to service everybody. So the future funding of the health service is absolutely crucial. And the major challenges to that are 4-fold if we vote no. Challenge number 1, George Osborne has promised categorically that if the Tories win the next UK election, he's going to, on top of the existing cuts, make another £25 billion worth of additional cuts to public services every year. And I can tell you, if you make another 25 billion of cuts, you'll either be totally unable to ring-fence the health budget, or if you do, you will have to slash to ribbons the budgets for education, for housing, for transport, and every other essential service. And the Labour Party, to their shame, have committed themselves also to those same Tory cuts of 25 billion a year. Second major threat, as Jack McConnell said last weekend, if you vote no, the Barnett formula will be abolished. That will cost Scotland up to another £4 billion a year. Thirdly, the privatisation of the health service in England. They're not privatising it so that they can increase public spending in the future. They're privatising it to cut public spending in the future. At the present time, there's £6 billion report yesterday from an organisation called the King's Fund in London, a very influential think tank on health policy south of the border. And it was called the New Settlement for Health. A report yesterday from an organisation called the King's Fund in London, a very influential think tank on health policy south of the border. And it was called the New Settlement for Health and Social Care in England. And they are proposing that you pay every time you go to visit your GP, and they're suggesting a charge of between £10 and £25. They're proposing that every time you go for an outpatient appointment at the hospital, there should be a charge of about the same amount. And they're proposing that if you're taken into hospital, you're charged for that as well. The reason they're doing that is part of the privatisation agenda. The reason they're doing that is because they want to replace the public funding of health with the private funding of health. And because under devolution, our health budget is calculated as a percentage of the English health budget, if public funding through time goes down for health in England, it will go down for health in Scotland as well, and there'll be damn all that we'll be able to do about it. And so I give you another commitment. If we get a yes vote, which I believe we will, on the 18th of September, we will not be introducing charges in the National Health Service in Scotland for our people. And as Mike is giving me the eye that my time is up, it's been like at home, then I'll just finish with this. This vote on the 18th of September isn't just for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It's for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. We might never ever get the chance again if we flunk it this time. So you think of 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, when you've got Prime Minister Boris Johnson running the UK. Someone who's already said the Scottish Parliament's get too much money and too much power. Under the Scotland Act, he can overrule anything we do in the Scottish Parliament. He can theoretically at least, and I don't think it'll be theoretical, he can almost, by cutting off our lifeline of funding, try to force us into privatisation and charging. He can slice our budget as much as he likes, and he can overrule any decision the Scottish Parliament makes. They've already overruled us on a number of things in the last 15 years. So no matter which way you look at it, this is not scaremongering about the future of the health service. I can tell you now, this vote on the 18th of September is about saving our health service and about protecting those three funds.
Anybody who talks about this topic about the health service is now accused of scaremongering. But you can actually see what is happening if you look, and Alec knows this because we've talked about this, if you look at education. South of the border, there's now privatisation of higher education. And that means that the amount of public money that is being spent is less. And if you look at the reduction in the Scottish budget over the last 3 years, a big anybody who talks about this topic about the health service is now accused of scaremongering. But you can actually see what is happening if you look, and Alec knows this because we've talked about this, if you look at education. South of the border, there's now privatisation of higher education. And that means that the amount of public money that is being spent is less. And if you look at the reduction in the Scottish budget over the last 3 years, a big part of that comes from the reduction in education spending south of the border, following through on the Barnett formula, so that we have less money coming to Scotland. And what that's meaning in England is a replication of what's happening in the United States. Let me give you, Alec likes to say statistics, let me give you this one, because it's stunning but true. In the United States of America, education debt is now higher than credit card debt. And that is precisely what is happening south of the border. That's why we decided 5 years ago, when I became Education Secretary, that education would be free, based on the ability to learn, not the ability to pay. And we've stuck with that, year on year. But that is as much at risk as the health service with a no vote. Because I know every day, every week of every day, there are people south of the border saying, Gordon Brown is one who said it recently, that Scottish education must get more like English education. And what that means is privatisation of our higher education and the introduction of the profit motive into delivering school education. We will never do that in Scotland, but we need a yes vote to guarantee that it can't happen. Now, I'm very pleased and proud to introduce our last speaker tonight. When I was a young candidate in 1985, the first time I stood for Parliament, I was adopted in July, and 2 months later the steel campaign started, the threat first to the whole steel industry in Lanarkshire. And I was a candidate in Clydesdale in Lanarkshire. And for a whole winter I appeared on platform after platform with one of my heroes, Jim Sillars. And I thought at that stage that I'd died and gone to heaven, because I was listening to a man who was the best public speaker in Scotland, putting forward a case for a huge change in Scotland. Now, Scotland wasn't listening at that stage, but I am so pleased that he is back campaigning in this referendum campaign, and not just campaigning with the Margot Mobile, which I was out with this afternoon, campaigning in this constituency. Jim, you and I spoke 10 days ago in Campbellton, and it was wonderful to hear you. It is great to see you here tonight. I know that you are making the difference in every part of Scotland, because when people hear what you have to say, they reflect on the experience you've had, they reflect on your knowledge in Scotland, then they are drawn inevitably to the conclusion that Scotland must vote yes. Jim, we welcome you.
Some folk might think that's a nutcase thing to do, but I found it very helpful. And I came to the conclusion that I had been wrong when I won the by-election in South Ayrshire. And at the end of that memo, some folk might think that's a nutcase thing to do, but I found it very helpful. And I came to the conclusion that I had been wrong when I won the by-election in South Ayrshire. And at the end of that memo, I said to myself, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, what I did, I moved from unionism to devolution I hadn't been able to think of previously. Then I came up against a new problem, because I began to realise, and Enoch Powell put it very well in the great debates in the 1970s, that devolution is power retained at Westminster. They give you this, but they always keep back the big stuff. And so I found myself a devolutionist, and then I moved. It took me 12 years, by the way. Any Labour voter in here, you ain't got 12 years, you've only a few days. It took me 12 years to move from unionist to someone who believes in independence. And it wasn't an easy intellectual or an emotional journey either. I was brought up in the Labour movement. I loved the Labour Party, and yet I had to split from the thing that I loved most outside of my family. Not easy to do, but finally I did it. Now, this time, I've retired. Then I came back out of retirement for this campaign. That's because I'm a grandpa. I've got 10 grandchildren, and every time one of them moved from primary 7 into S1 and secondary, I wrote them a grandpa letter of advice, on the basis they're more likely to take it from me than their mothers and fathers, which I think is true. And I've sat down with each one of them. Some folk might think it's boasting, but I reckon my understanding of the United Kingdom economy is far superior to any Chancellor of the Exchequer, including Alistair Darling. When Alistair Darling made his budget speech in 2008, it's hilarious. He was forecasting growth for every year ahead and the stability of the banking and financial system. I was making a speech at the same time, and I was only an old-age pensioner, saying the tsunami was halfway across the Atlantic. Within weeks of his budget speech, we were into the huge crises of the worst depression we've had since the 1930s and the banking crisis. So I've sat down with each one of my grandchildren and I've told them, if Scotland votes no, you're yoking yourself, our people are going to handcuff themselves to a declining power, a fading power south of the border. And the only advice I can give you, my grandchildren, is to get the best skill level, or if you go to university, get the best academic qualifications you possibly can, in order to do what countless others have done before you, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. Because if we vote no, this will continue to be a grossly unequal society. It will continue to be low-paid society. It will continue to be a poverty-based society. And you've got to get out. So I'm campaigning for my grandchildren, and I'm campaigning for everybody else's grandchildren as well. On the 18th of September, between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m, something unique will happen. In those 15 hours, you and me and everybody with a vote in Scotland, for the first time ever, are totally sovereign and have complete power over our country. We decide what happens. If at a minute past 10 we voted no, we've given that power away. And don't think you're going to get a prize from Westminster for doing so. We will have got Scotland naked in the negotiating room. They'll run all over us. If we vote yes, the power of those 15 hours remains with us, not for a short period of time, but forever. I'm campaigning, I said, for children and grandchildren. This document here was debated in the Scottish Grant Committee when I was an MP in 1973. It's called Born to Fail. And what it demonstrated was what happens to a child born into poverty. And recent research has backed it up. If a child from the womb, not from birth, from the womb to 3-year-old is substantially deprived, it injures their whole journey through the rest of their lives. It cripples their educational potential and development. We have 250,000 children in poverty in Scotland in a population of 5 million. We should be ashamed of that. How can we the 14th richest nation on earth, according to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. How can we sustain that position for those children? Someone said to me last week, suppose there's a child in one of those deprived areas that has the potential intellectual capacity to discover a cure for a particular cancer. That child will never know, and this society will never benefit from it. There are people in Scotland who are doing okay, whether we're independent or not. And I've got to say to you, and I've got to say to no voters, rake your conscience. There's 1 million people out of 5 million living in poverty. 250,000 children living in poverty. At the Maryhill Food Bank, a woman turned up on a Tuesday. Her and her 2 children hadn't eaten since the previous Thursday night. When they got to the food bank, they looked for cans with a pull, so that with their fingers, they would actually be able to start eating something. We should be ashamed that any citizen of ours is placed in that condition. I was a child during the war. Nobody starved during the war. Nobody was made destitute during the war. It is happening now in Scotland at the present time. And we've got to put an end to that. And the only way we can put an end to that is by voting yes. A no vote continues the poverty and the inequality. It's time we took the power of our own country and started transforming it. Now, I'll tell you something that matters to Dunoon and the Clyde area, how we can do it. You will not be aware that in 1981, oil and gas was discovered under the waters of the Firth of Clyde and at the Solway Firth. We didn't know about that until about 3 or 4 weeks ago, when the government documents became available and Chick Brodie, an MSP, went to the National Archives and delved into them. 1981, remember that date. 1981, BP and others had dug all the seismic stuff and then asked for a production licence. They were so certain there was oil and gas under the Clyde. On the 17th of September, 1981, the Ministry of Defence wrote to the Department of Energy and said, under no circumstances can there be an oil and gas industry at the Firth of Clyde. Under no circumstances. Morality in moving from Fastlane down, let's say, down to Devonport. Well, there's this morality. Scotland would be the 2nd place on earth that got rid of nuclear weapons. The morality in moving from Fastlane down, let's say, down to Devonport. Well, there's this morality. Scotland would be the 2nd place on earth that got rid of nuclear weapons. South Africa, when Nelson Mandela took over, they got rid of their nuclear weapons. And they'll say to us, but somebody else will use them. And what we say to them is, yes, but as Robert Burns said, man's inhumanity to man makes countless thousands more. At least it will not be done by our hand. Our hands will be done. But I have another reason for getting rid of Trident. When it goes, we're talking about a new industry in the Clyde. Oil and gas. You build rigs, you build supply vessels, you do maintenance, you do inshore and offshore engineering of a very high level. We're talking about all our children and our grandchildren getting the opportunity for high-skilled jobs and high-skilled wages. Youngsters getting real apprenticeships. That's all available to us if we vote yes. If we vote no, that oil and gas will remain where it is. the Trident submarine will keep sailing, and we'll have no job opportunities for our young people. The difference between voting yes and no is unbelievable. But I want to finish. I want to finish with two quotations which actually sum up the difference between no and yes. The first one, and they're both from women. Carolyn will be pleased about that. The first one says, "We're not genetically programmed in Scotland to make political decisions." Joanne Lamont. Negative, sour, and insulting. The second one's different. This is our time of reckoning. We've got to take it. And if we don't take it, we are consigning our children to much less than we've had. To narrow horizons, lower aspirations. We are consigning our children to being small, when we should be giving them a much bigger and better world. Margot MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you for that wonderful contribution to our thinking tonight. Now, we've got about half an hour for questions, and I'm going to come amongst you for questions. I'm going to take them in groups of 2 or 3, and I'd make 2 requests. One is that your question is brief and to the point. Please identify yourself, and I'll ask the panel to be brief too, because I don't want every question to be answered by everybody, so I'll try and choose who's going to answer the question, and we'll try and keep it brief to get as many in as possible. So, on this side of the hall, who would like to ask a question? There's a gentleman there, hand up already.
My question isn't so much political. Other political questions have been more or less answered in the last couple of weeks. However, why is the Scottish Parliament allowed the Scottish people to be so insulted as it has been in the last few weeks? This is a monumental decision, as everybody agrees. And yet, Alex Salmon stands on a platform debating, not with Cameron, because that man's never showed his face up here. How much an insult to Scotland is that? If they want us to stay part of the Union that much, that they can't even be bothered coming up, I take that as a real insult.
Jim, would you like to address the question of the insult? There's a microphone coming there. And can people start to put their hands up down here? We'll get some questions asked. Just 1 second.
The answer's quite easy. He's feared.
Yeah.
If I could also add as well, I think on Monday night he preferred to watch Man City versus Liverpool or something like that. But he's only reflecting what I know from Westminster MPs and colleagues to that they actually don't care too much if Scotland goes. You know, the big deal of 30 years ago is gone. You know, I hear from Labour MPs, I hear from Conservative MPs, good luck, go, cheerio, we don't mind. Labour MPs will tell me I'm in favour of independent Cuba, independent Venezuela, independent Scotland is quite normal. So we shouldn't think that Westminster MPs are desperate to keep a hold of us. They really aren't. And some of them are actually quite fair-minded about it. They do support our independence quietly in their parties.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. My name's Bob Brown, stay in Strathclyde, and I'm a retired university lecturer. I would like to know if anyone in the panel can actually tell me what benefits the Devo Max in the event of a no vote is going to bring to Scotland.
Alec and Carolyn, perhaps.
Well, I don't know if you've been able to attend any debates where representatives of the No campaign have been at. Will you been able to ask that question? No.
I must admit, I've been relying on what I could hear on television.
Well, the thing is, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to hunt them down to put them on the spot on these questions. But they're a very vague proposals from each of the parties. In terms of what's on offer, from Labour, for example, it's less than is an offer from the Tories in terms of responsibility and spending, in terms of power over all taxation. It's not. It's only a wee bit. They don't want it to be big, the big stuff. There isn't any party offering control of foreign affairs or defence or employment law. I think Labour are proposing that the employment tribunals come under the jurisdiction of the Scottish Parliament, but not employment law itself. So an employment law is an interest of mine, and is something that would be, if we had the power, could make a huge difference in terms of control of the minimum wage, actually implementing equal pay legislation, improving equal pay legislation, equalities itself, you know, for women. None of the parties are proposing that. I did a debate last night, and there was a Lib Dem in the audience, don't know if there's any Lib Dems here, who said federalism was an option. Now, Nick Clegg has been visible in the news a lot over the last few years, most notably for reneging on his promises in tuition fees. I've been aware all my life that the Lib Dems technically had a policy of federalism, but I haven't seen Nick Clegg on any soapbox anywhere banging the drum for federalism. And the Lib Dems are finished, even if they actually were proposing it. So, as I said earlier, there are a number of things that are on offer, but they're wee bits. They're just sweeties. It's not enough.
Can I just add this, Bob? Carolyn's absolutely right in saying the powers that are being promised are deliberately vague, and they are very small town type additional powers anyway. But I don't think we're even going to get that if we vote no, because the interpretation in London of a no vote is they can do what the hell they like with us. Now, you and I are old enough to remember 1979 and the famous speech by Sir Alec Douglas-Hume. I remember it well. And Sir Alec Douglas-Hume made a speech saying, vote no, and that was just for the Scottish Assembly, but he actually said, vote no, and you'll get something better. The something better was Margaret Thatcher. So let us never make that mistake again. If you vote no, you get bugger off.
Let's keep going.
I'd like to address this to Alex Neil. Alex, you probably know this, but the Dunoon population in the last 10 years has fallen by 5.1%, partly due to the fact of the Argyll ferries, which in 2012 you said were not fit for purpose. And a year later, Nicola Sturgeon said also they're not fit for purpose. And a couple of months after that, at Holyrood, with 60 other people from Dunoon, I was there and heard her saying that the status quo in Dunoon is not an option about the ferries. And yet we've heard a lot of promises from the government that they would sort this out. That hasn't been sorted out. So what kind of promises?
I think to be fair, Alec Neil is no longer the Minister responsible for that. Alec, do you want to say a word? But I'm happy to tackle it too.
I've been out of this for 2 years, so I think it's better if you answer mine.
Well, I mean, the situation at the present, as you know, is that there has been a discussion with potential tenderers for the route. Not one has come forward with a tender. And what Nicola has done in the last week is continued the arrangement with the Chorus to make sure that there is at least a supporting vessel during the winter. But, you know, from the very beginning this has been said that there are two problems. One is getting a tenderer to tender for this, and the second one is a European issue. Now here's the relevance to this particular debate tonight. If we are an independent member of the EU, then we can go in and argue our case in the EU. If we're not an independent member of the EU, we have no rights to argue the case. So if you are, as some people are, still very concerned about the ferry issue, then the yes vote is the only way you'll get progress. Thanks very much.
My name's Harry Revy and I live locally, and I was very pleased to hear the commitment from the yes side on the safety of the National Health Service, which is very, very, very important to us all. And next year a pensioner. And one thing that bothers me slightly is my old age pension going to be guaranteed? I don't know how the assets or what I've paid in will be dished out. I presume, of course, that it will be guaranteed as would normally be the case.
There is an absolute guarantee, but Jim, do you want to deal with this?
Oh, yes.
And then perhaps Carolyn too, who's I know knows about pensions.
Because I'm an old age pensioner, just like you. I've got a state pension and I have a parliamentary pension from the time I was in Parliament. I got 1360 or what the pay I got in 1992. The state pension, and to be fair to him, the Minister for Pensions down in Westminster is a guy called Webb. And he's already put it on the record. Whether Scotland is independent or not makes no difference. They will pay the state pension because there's a contractual legal liability. You and I have paid the correct amount of national insurance contributions. If, for example, you decide to move to Germany, you'll still get the state pension. There are places in Europe where the state pensioners in Spain, which is quite a hot country, get the winter allowance, for example, because there's a contractual obligation. My parliamentary pension is exactly the same as a company pension. Doesn't matter where I go in the world, they must pay me because they're legally bound to do so. So there was a scaremongering went on in the early part of the campaign from the no side, your pension will be in trouble and all that. That is untrue. To be fair to the Minister, he has put that well beyond dispute. You and I, I'm happy to tell you, you and I are quite safe in our old age.
Carolyn's just going to say a word or two briefly if you could, Carolyn.
Yeah, well, because Jim has dealt with it all. I think the question should in the world. The difference is we doesn't feel like that because there's too much wealth concentrated in too few hands. With the power, we can do something about that.
Thank you.
In the world. The difference is we doesn't feel like that because there's too much wealth concentrated in too few hands. With the power, we can do something about that.
Thank you.
100 McClintock. My point was a campaign point to put to the panel. On pensions, I feel we've got a very strong position to argue, as you've just demonstrated. Listening to the debates, including the Alex Salmond debate, on the media, I don't feel our strong case on pensions is coming across. And since the over 55s, the polls say they're leaning towards no, I think could this be a great big push in the next 2 weeks?
Chris, could I ask you particularly about, do you have in your Green Goddess leaflets on pensions and do you come across this?
Actually, I haven't got any, but I'd like some if anybody's got any. But I do get asked this question. It's bizarre that we live in one of the wealthiest places in the world, and yet we've got one of the most terrible pensions. In fact, I'm obviously not retired yet, and by the time I reach pension age, if I stay within the UK, I'm probably going to be 70 years of age or more, looking forward to one of the worst pensions in Europe. So it's obvious to me that for Scotland to become independent, one of the key things that comes out of that is that we get a better pension, we work towards that. Just take one example. Norway is roughly the same size as Scotland, and it has the wealthiest pension pot on the planet, and it did it in less than 20 years. So the next time somebody tells you we can't afford good pensions, just point to Norway. And the next time you hear them telling you oil's going to run out, well, in 20 years Norway did it. So if it's going to run out in 36 years, then we're going to have bloody good pensions amongst other things.
Angus, could you address the campaign point? How do we get this message across?
Indeed, yes. Just as an aside there, Alec Neil's just asked me when I'm getting the state pension. I pointed out to him that I'm actually 64, but I've looked after myself so well, I passed for 44. I think that's a good point. Health has become a campaign point. I think one of the statistics, the 5-year rolling average, is very helpful to Scotland here. The facts help Scotland. On welfare and welfare state and the pensions, the average spend as a percentage of tax revenue in Scotland is 39.1%, but in the UK it's 41.6%. So the underlying economics say that the pensions and the welfare state are more sustainable and safer in an independent Scotland. And yes, it should be a campaigning point, because as we've seen, when we've made the health service a campaigning point, it is more sustainable in an independent Scotland than it is in the UK. Similarly with pensions, and it's an issue that's right to be taken by the Yes campaign to make sure that people over 65 understand that they do, as Carolyn said, have the worst pensions in Europe. And if you want the information of this, I'd ask you to go home to power up Google, dial in the Daily Mail, bizarrely, dial in November and dial in UK pensions. And the Daily Mail is one of the papers that slates the pension level in the United Kingdom. That's the Daily Mail. And if the Daily Mail are slating the pensions in the United Kingdom, we know we've got a serious problem.
Thank you.
Someone once said that we inherit our past, we create our future. We can only create our future if we vote yes. But the question I've got is that my understanding is that 75 countries have had independence from the UK since the Second World War. As far as I know, not one of them, some of them are successful, some aren't. Some are rich, some are poor. But not one of them has asked to come back to the UK.
Correct. So, how do we make more of that? Thank you. How do we make more of that, Jim?
Relatively small step. And I can't imagine us becoming independent, doing the things that we actually can do, using our imagination to do different things and to do things differently the way we are at the present time. Let me tell you about, in my book, which I hope you'll all read to make me a millionaire, in my book, when I gave a draft to some of my friends, they told me, don't put that in, Jim. Folk relatively small step. And I can't imagine us becoming independent, doing the things that we actually can do, using our imagination to do different things and to do things differently the way we are at the present time. Let me tell you about, in my book, which I hope you'll all read to make me a millionaire, in my book, when I gave a draft to some of my friends, they told me, don't put that in, Jim. Folk will mock it. But I kept it in. And it was this. This is where imagination comes in when you're independent. We've got 2 aircraft carriers. The Royal Navy cannot crew the second one because it's skint. So I said, we'll take it. It's not an asset for them, it's a liability. We'll take it. But instead of putting weapons on board, we'll turn it into an international hospital and rescue ship. And I've costed it £35 million a year out of our defence budget. Just think, that silly woman's in charge of aid at Westminster said Scottish independence would be bad for the third world countries. Just think what we can do. There's a vessel called the Africa Mercy, 16,500 tons. It's a hospital ship. They do 3,300 surgical operations a year. They go into very poor places in Africa where people have got cataracts and they take them away, where children have got cleft palates and they cure it. Think of the difference that makes to those people and that child. If we launch our own hospital and international rescue ship with young men and women on board, medical people, medicines, and all that's required, think of the transformation we can make. Instead of sending our young people out to kill people, we send them out to heal people.
Angus, you're going to be very brief indeed. I'm going to take a couple of questions from this side of the hall as we wind up, because we're getting very close to the end. So, very briefly.
Yeah, Alistair Darling often says that independence is a one-way street. Now, I think he's absolutely wrong there in saying that categorically independence is a one-way street. I don't think it is. I think what Alistair Darling is saying is the empirical observations that when people get their independence, they choose not to go back. It's not a matter of international law that independence is a one-way street. It only seems a one-way street because no one chooses to go back, and I think that's the point we should bear in mind. When we get it, we won't go back, and as myself and Jim exchanged earlier, in 10 years, and as Jim said, if we vote yes at Christmas, nobody will claim to have voted no.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've got a question about the currency, which is a very hot item, I think. A few months ago, Mark Carnegie spoke on behalf of the Bank of England and said to Alex Salmond that we could have the pound sterling if we handed in a little bit of sovereignty. Now, I'd like to know how far that goes. And also, I don't know if you're aware of this, but most people most probably aren't. If you look at the currency we have, the English currency has no pound sterling on it. The Scottish currency has pound sterling. And in the UK, we use pound sterling. I think we should take note of that.
Okay. Alec, do you want to say a word or two about currency?
Can I just tell you a story? There is a man called Mervyn King. Until last year, he was a governor of the Bank of England. Now, he hasn't said this publicly, but it is well known that privately he is saying the day after a yes vote, not only will they confirm we're going to have a currency union, they'll pass as many independent countries have done. All of these are perfectly viable options. They're all viable options. The experts advise that the best option would be the pound plus a currency union. We actually believe on the 19th of September, as many independent countries have done. All of these are perfectly viable options. They're all viable options. The experts advise that the best option would be the pound plus a currency union. We actually believe on the 19th of September there'll be a sudden change of mind, and as I say, not only will they say yes to the currency union, they'll promise us a thistle on the pound as well.
Jim, would you like to say a word about it?
Well, actually, I'm all in favour of a separate Scottish currency. I understand the logic of what Alex Salmond is saying. And it's actually, when he says it's better for England, Wales and Northern Ireland to be in a currency union with us, he is absolutely correct. And I'll tell you why. The United Kingdom as a whole imports far more than exports. All the days of my life, it's been in a balance of payments problem and because of a balance of trade. If we are not in a currency union when we are independent, Scotland exports vastly more than it imports. If that's taken out of the balance of trade of the United Kingdom, then the English economy essentially is in a far worse condition, and it's exposed to the international financial markets in a way that it isn't at the present time. I expect them to have a U-turn. Now that's actually easy for them to do. If there was one of them who said no and two didn't say anything, the one that U-turn would get yaboo. But when three of them say no, the three can U-turn without any criticism whatsoever, and that will happen.
I'm just about to take that question.
Okay. I don't know if you remember, but I think it was February the 16th when we had this statement from the Mound that we wouldn't have the pound. I don't know if you had a shiver down your spine or you thought that's it, the game's up, but it didn't scare me. In fact, 2 days later, I was reading McWhirter in the Herald, and he described it quite simply as the most intellectually dishonest part of the entire Better Together argument. And actually, if you look at where it's at now, it's the last thing they're hanging it on. I was actually on Referendum TV just on Sunday that Ian McWhirter, the same person, was hosting, and I had a private chat with him, and I said, do you still feel that the pound is the most intellectually dishonest part of it? He went further, he said, more to the point, this is like the Wizard of Oz. We're on a path towards a journey, and what's happening is we're getting to the point where we're about to pull that blanket down. And so my belief is quite simple, just as what Jim said and what Alex has said, is that it's the most sensible choice for the rest of the UK, as well as it is ourselves. Bernard, just one last point, Bernard Ponsonby, a week past Thursday, if I remember correctly, on STV, asked Ed Miliband when he was up here telling us that Labour would veto Scotland, bearing in mind there's a lot of Labour Party members here and elsewhere as well, would veto Scotland if we want to try and be in a currency union. He said, just tell us then please, Ed, how much is that going to cost the rest of the UK? His reply went a little bit skew-whiff, and he went, oh, well, there have been various figures. He went, no, really, can you tell us? Are we talking hundreds of millions of pounds? Ed Miliband agreed to that. Now, that's a government that people are being told they have to live in fear of. If you go back to people like Benjamin Franklin, who said there's two types of society. There's a government where people are live in fear of, or you can have a government where the government's in fear of its people. So here's your chance right now. If we vote yes, we can hold our governments forever in future, proportional representative government we have in Scotland, in its grip from us, or we can have it the other way around according to the scary bit on the pound.
Thank you.
Hello, I've worked in the NHS for 35 years, so I'm delighted tonight to hear the commitment in an independent Scotland to unite understanding principles, and I think that's a really important message to get out to the public. My question is, in an independent Scotland where the NHS is free at point of need, how do we square that circle when we're increasingly becoming integrated with local authority, council, social care services, where we have